Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com. Are you getting all the nutrients you need from the food you eat? If you're taking certain medications, the answer could be no. This is the People's Pharmacy with Terry and Joe Graydon.
Dietary supplements have become surprisingly controversial. Many health professionals look down their noses at the idea of taking supplements. Instead, they advise their patients to eat a well-balanced diet. Yet the dietary guidelines keep changing. How can you make sense of the confusion?
Dr. Tieraona Low Dog is one of the country's leading experts on herbs, vitamins, minerals, and other dietary supplements. She'll share the latest science on supplements.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, we talk with Dr. Low Dog about her new book, Fortify Your Life.
First, the news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, the Zika virus poses a hazard in more countries than the CDC originally suspected. Travel warnings have been extended to several more countries, including Barbados, Bolivia, Guadeloupe, Cape Verde, Samoa, and St. Martin. The CDC has recommended that pregnant women avoid traveling to the Caribbean and Latin American countries where mosquitoes carry this virus. That's because infants exposed in utero may be born with unusually small heads and brain damage. Brazil has been especially hard hit, with nearly 4,000 babies born with microcephaly. In adults, many people may not know they've been infected because symptoms are often mild and nonspecific. There is suspicion, however, that some individuals may develop a neurological condition called Guillain-Barré syndrome. This can lead to loss of sensation and ultimately paralysis.
After years of hints that women may have different symptoms and outcomes of heart disease than men, the American Heart Association has made it official. This week, the organization published a scientific statement on heart attacks in women. Although chest pain is the most common symptom in both males and females, women are more likely to experience nausea or vomiting, shortness of breath, and neck or back pain instead of just chest pain. This may delay the diagnosis of a heart attack and make them less likely to get prompt emergency treatment.
Epidemiological research has suggested that low levels of vitamin D are associated with a variety of serious health conditions, including cancer, heart disease, inflammatory disorders, diabetes, and dementia. Another health problem where vitamin D has been thought to play a role is asthma. Research has suggested that vitamin D may be important for the immune system and lung function during early development. To answer the question of whether vitamin D taken during pregnancy might help prevent asthma in babies, investigators in Denmark and the U.S. carried out randomized controlled trials. In both studies, all the pregnant volunteers got prenatal vitamins with 400 international units of vitamin D. Likewise, in both trials, the women were randomized to get placebo or additional vitamin D. The children were followed up to age 3. In the Danish study, the women were given 2,400 international units of vitamin D. About 16% of their children had persistent wheezing, compared to 20% of those whose mothers took placebo pills. That difference was not significant. In the U.S. study, the experimental dose of vitamin D was higher, at 4,000 international units. By age 3, 24% of the children exposed to extra vitamin D in utero had developed recurrent asthma, compared to 30% in the placebo group. These results are not enough to tell for sure whether prenatal vitamins should contain more than 400 international units of vitamin D to reduce the risk of asthma in the children. More research is needed to resolve this question.
The United States Preventive Services Task Force issues recommendations for screening based on the evidence from studies. This week, the task force published its recommendations for depression screening in JAMA. It found that the benefits of screening for depression in adults outweigh any harms. Specifically, the task force recommends screening women who are pregnant or who have recently given birth. The guidelines urge that such women be treated with cognitive behavioral therapy or other evidence-based counseling if they're depressed. The task force envisions a multidisciplinary, team-based approach for depressions that strengthens and supports self-care.
A new study in the BMJ confirms that children and teenagers who take standard antidepressant medications such as fluoxetine, paroxetine, sertraline, or venlafaxine are more likely to become aggressive or attempt suicide. The Danish researchers reviewed results from 70 clinical trials involving more than 18,000 patients. They found that some of the published studies misreported adverse events and may have underestimated the degree of harm. Although the authors found no significant link to adult suicides, they found that the danger of aggressiveness or suicide was doubled in teenagers taking antidepressants. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Vitamins were discovered about 100 years ago. For decades, doctors were excited about the new research that revealed which nutrients were essential for health and the dire consequences of deficiencies. But in modern times, nutrition education has gotten short shrift in many medical schools. Health professionals often denigrate the need for supplements and tell people they can get all their nutritional needs met with a well-balanced diet.
But is that adequate? To sort out the science about supplements, we turn to Dr. Tieraona Low Dog. She's Fellowship Director of the first Interprofessional Fellowship in Integrative Health and Medicine. She's an internationally recognized expert in the fields of integrative medicine, dietary supplements, herbal medicine, and women's health. Her brand new book is Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Tieraona Low Dog.
Thank you. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
And we are so grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about your new book. You start the book with a story, an 11 p.m. phone call from someone you loved. And, those calls are usually not good news. Can you tell us a little bit about that call and a tale of unintended consequences?
Sure. My husband and I were actually up in Canada, and we got a call from my mother late in the evening, and she told me my father had been admitted to the hospital. And when I asked her what the problem was, she wasn't really sure, just that some of his numbers were off. Now, you need to remember they're in their 80s, and so some of this stuff is very confusing. The problem that had happened was over maybe a 10 or 12-day period, he had been having increasing weakness in his legs, and he'd also started to develop some diarrhea. And then the morning that my mom took him to the hospital, he felt something was wrong with his heart, and he didn't feel he was having a heart attack, but something was wrong with his heart. And he had horrible cramps. Well, when they took him to the hospital, the long and short of it was that his potassium, but significantly his magnesium levels were dangerously low. So low that he had to be admitted and placed on IV magnesium, and it took him a day and a half to get those levels back to normal. 1 week later, he was back in the hospital again, and the levels were extremely low. He had been placed on a proton pump inhibitor and sort of left on it for years, and nobody was really monitoring it.
And Tieraona, what is a proton pump inhibitor, if you don't mind my interrupting?
Certainly. Proton pump inhibitors are medications that are used to treat acid reflux and hopefully generally more severe forms. What happens in many people, though, is when they take these products like Nexium or Prilosec or Prevacid, these are common names for these medications, nobody is following some of the nutrient depletions that can occur. So two things happened. with my father. One was that he developed Clostridium difficile, or C. diff, which is an intestinal infection, and people who take these medications are at higher risk for developing this kind of infection. That had caused the diarrhea. And of course, the proton pump inhibitors come with a warning that if you stay on them for a period of time, especially longer than a year, and people over the age of 50, it increases your risk of magnesium deficiency pretty significantly. So my father, who has lived with cancer for many, many years and has been an amazing survivor of cancer, he almost lost his life to basically a medication that stops reflux. When I asked him to go off of that medication, everybody says you have to wean off of it. I was convinced he didn't need to because most 80-year-olds don't make much stomach acid. And he stopped the medications, and of course he had no rebound reflux of any kind, and he's been able to keep his levels stable. But my point, one of the reasons for writing this book, is because I believe the conversation that we have in the United States is overly simplistic when it comes to the role of vitamins and minerals in our everyday health.
Well, hence the title, Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More. And I think that in this day and age, there are a lot of health professionals who have sort of been trained in medical school. You don't need vitamins, you don't need extra minerals, just eat a well-balanced diet, and that's the end of the story. And whenever some study comes out and says, oh, you don't need this vitamin, it didn't do anything in this clinical trial, there's kind of a nanny boo-boo attitude, like we told you so. Why is there such antipathy towards supplements by health professionals?
I think it's a wonderful question, and as part of the medical profession, I must admit I'm somewhat baffled. The tremendous work that was done by early researchers, and many of them physicians in the late 1800s up through the 1950s, when we first identified vitamins and minerals and their role in health. I mean, this was work done by researchers and physicians who found that many people suffered from the diseases that were wrought from people not getting enough of these key nutrients. I think it's also that because there's this sentiment, and we keep saying everybody should get everything they need in their diet, which clearly people need to eat good diets, but we're not looking at what the evidence actually shows. A lot of the work that I took from this book came from government resources. One of them was the Second National Report on Biochemical Indicators of Diet and Nutrition in the U.S. Population. Now, that's a big, old, long word for a study that has been ongoing from the Centers for Disease Control. And essentially what they found is they looked at a number of different markers, if you will, for some of the key nutrients. Now, they didn't look at everything. They just looked at a few. But what we found was essentially 30 million Americans are deficient in B6. Now, I just want you to think about that. Key deficient. I mean, they're not borderline. They're frankly deficient in B6. I will tell you as a physician, I have never ordered a B6 level. Before this, I had no idea. I've asked colleagues, they're like, B6, really? 30 million Americans? That's almost the entire population of Canada.
And you're actually talking about a deficiency, not just a little bit low on some scale.
We're talking
might be nice.
frank deficiency.
Wow.
As measured by blood levels by the Centers for Disease Control. So we're not saying let's check somebody's diet history and sort of make a guess. We're saying that we actually looked at people's levels and used the most accurate way of testing, pyridoxal 5-phosphate, and we found that 30 million Americans are deficient. Now, I want you to think about this. What is B6 necessary to do? I mean, it's necessary for making all of the chemicals in your brain that allow you to have a healthy mood, for you to feel energized, for you to experience pleasure. You need it to make melatonin. So if you don't have enough B6, you can't make serotonin, you can't make melatonin. And think of all the people in the United States that don't sleep well. So I have to admit I was really stunned by that, and the fact that nobody's talking about it is deeply disturbing to me. When I look at basically 10% of the population being deficient in this, and I look at roughly 11% of Americans taking antidepressant medication, I have to wonder if there's a connection.
Well, you also mentioned the fact that your dad ended up in the hospital with very low levels of magnesium, which can, when they're too low, cause cardiac arrest. As you pointed out, it can be life-threatening. Magnesium is not always routinely measured, nor vitamin B12. And you were talking about acid-suppressing drugs like Nexium or Prilosec, which can also affect vitamin B12, as can a diabetes drug that's very popular and very effective called metformin. And yet a lot of people don't get these routine tests, whether it's for riboflavin, magnesium, or B12. Why not?
Well, that's another great question. But I think it's in part that because we continue to hear these messages that people don't need vitamins and that vitamins don't do everything and that Americans get everything that they need in their diet, that physicians also hear those same messages. And so we don't measure what we're not looking for. We're just simply not looking for it. In this study, 18 million Americans were deficient in B12. And I don't mean borderline, I mean frankly deficient. And the risk of B12 deficiency, of it being low enough to be truly a deficiency, increases our risk not only for depression and cognitive decline, especially as we get older, but it certainly can cause irreversible nerve damage. And I want you to think about the fact that we have a heavier and heavier population that is increasingly becoming diabetic, and many of these people are also on proton pump inhibitors. In the American Diabetes Association Journal, there was an article that said metformin and proton pump inhibitors are a polypharmacy recipe for neuropathy or nerve damage. And as we get heavier and more people are placed on metformin, and we had 118 million prescriptions for proton pump inhibitors just last year, we are going to just see an avalanche of depression, of people with foggy thinking, and worse, people who have problems with their nerves. You mentioned magnesium with proton pump inhibitors, is my father's case. The physician said that if my dad would have stayed home probably another 12 to 14 hours, he probably would have died from a fatal arrhythmia.
Yikes.
His magnesium was so low that he'd never seen a magnesium so low. So this is what I'm saying. When we make statements like, people are getting everything they're needing in their diet, what I'm saying is that's not what the evidence shows.
You're listening to Dr. Tieraona Low Dog, Fellowship Director for the Academy of Integrative Health and Medicine. Formerly, she directed the fellowship program at the University of Arizona Center for Integrative Medicine. She's chaired numerous panels on dietary supplements and botanicals for the United States Pharmacopoeia. Her latest book is Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More, from National Geographic.
After the break, we'll talk more about personalized nutrition.
You can now find out what you're missing without a doctor's prescription. Order your own tests.
Data show that 90 million Americans are deficient in vitamin D.
What about vegetarians and vegans? What nutrients might they be missing?
Dr. Low Dog guides us through the confusion of supplement labels and vitamin formulas.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. Online at uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show 1022. That number again, 800-732-2334. Online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're talking about vitamins, minerals, and other supplements. Is there something you should be taking? Our guest is Dr. Tieraona Low Dog, one of the country's leading experts in integrative medicine. Her new book is Fortify Your Life, your guide to vitamins, minerals, and more.
Dr. Low Dog, one of the key elements in this wonderful new book of yours has to do with what I'm going to call customized or personalized nutrition. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think there's two parts of that. One is for you to take an honest assessment about, what is it that you eat in your diet and how much sunshine do you get? And are you on certain medications that may be depleting your key nutrients? And then to make a chart, if you will, I've provided some ways for people to kind of make a chart to go through and really look at what supplements or what nutrients you may be really marginal or insufficient in. There is now the availability for people in most states, not all, but in most states, to actually order their own laboratory tests for nutrients.
Whoa, wait a minute. Are you telling me that a person who says, gee, I'm a little concerned, I'd like to know about my B6 levels, I'd like to know how much B12 I have or what my magnesium levels are, they don't have to go and get a prescription from their doctor?
In a few states you do, which I find really interesting, that if your doctor won't order it in certain states, then you have no right to have an access to order that test yourself. However, in most states, you can now go online through a number of companies that use the same labs that you would go to if your doctor made the order for you to get a lab test done. And you go in and you can get your lab test done looking at key nutrients. Now, you don't need to have every nutrient looked at, but in some cases there may be some that you want to check to make sure that they're in the right range. This could be if you're taking a medication, if you're a vegetarian, or if you have certain disease risks, diabetics and others may be at higher risk. I'd like to say that if you went to your physician and said, I'm on these medications and they're known to deplete these nutrients, can we check them? Many physicians will not order the test. I had a black woman who lives in Michigan or Minnesota who heard me speak and went to her physician and said, I'm a black woman and I'm pregnant and I just wanted to know, could I have my vitamin D level checked? And the physician said, no, I will not check it. You just need to take the recommended daily allowance and you'll have everything you need. I promise you, a black woman living in Michigan or Minnesota taking 600 IUs a day of vitamin D will be deficient. 90 million Americans are either insufficient or frankly deficient in vitamin D. And she had specific risks for vitamin D deficiency, and we don't want you to be deficient in pregnancy, but he would not order the lab test. So you see what I'm saying? I think that it's actually a good thing that people, if their physicians are not willing to partner with them to help them determine if they're deficient in key nutrients, that there are laboratory tests at companies that are available for you to do this on your own and then get you your labs. And then, of course, I would encourage you to go to your doctor and say, I had these labs done and it showed I'm deficient. Could you partner with me to help me get these corrected?
Dr. Low Dog, please explain to us why it matters so much that she is African American and that she's living in a northern state.
Well, vitamin D is actually, it's one of the exceptions to the, vitamins or things you have to get in your diet, because vitamin D was intended to be gotten from the sun, from our skin's exposure to the sun. The darker the skin, the more difficult it is to actually take up sunlight and convert that in the skin into vitamin D. African Americans are at much higher risk for vitamin D deficiency than white Americans. And if you live north of Denver, if you sort of took a line and drew it across a map and you put Denver as the midpoint, people who live north of Denver generally have what we would call a long vitamin D winter, meaning that it's hard for them to maintain their vitamin D levels even if they got enough exposure to the sun during the summer. When you complicate by the fact that she has darker colored skin and she lives north, it's going to be almost impossible for her to get all the vitamin D that she needs. I was on a panel at an OBGYN conference, and I had a very prestigious OBGYN, this was a number of years ago, who was at Johns Hopkins. And somebody asked me about testing vitamin D during pregnancy, and I turned and asked him, well, what do you think? I mean, because he was a much, smarter person, and he was an obstetrician and, pretty renowned fella. And he said, I check every woman in the first trimester, especially black women. So this is in Baltimore. So, again, there's just this kind of disconnect, I think, between what the evidence is showing and what the public health messages are and what we're actually doing in our own clinical practices. And I think patients are just going to have to take on, unfortunately, more of this knowledge themselves to become more savvy so that they can take care of themselves.
Dr. Low Dog, can you tell us what nutrients vegetarians and vegans might be at particular risk for?
Well, again, I think that you can have very many people who are healthy vegetarians who really invest well in their diet. But B12, we do see in the studies that B12 deficiency over time will often develop, particularly in vegans, but also in vegetarians. And the older an individual is who's a vegetarian, the more likely they are to become B12 deficient because it's harder for us to absorb B12 from our food as we age. The thing about B12 is most people think of B vitamins as water-soluble so that you lose them very quickly. B12 is a bit of an exception to that rule. It stores in the liver, and often we'll have 3 to 4 years of stored vitamin B12. I mean, it stores for a while if you've been consuming meat, etc. So you may not see it right away in somebody who adopts a vegetarian diet, but somebody with a lifelong vegetarian history is at risk for B12 deficiency. Other things that they are at risk for, could be vitamin K, vitamin B6, iron. They have a higher need for iron because plant iron is not absorbed as well. It's called non-heme iron. Zinc, they need a higher requirement of zinc, about a 50% higher amount of the RDA for a vegetarian. They need more zinc than somebody who is an omnivore who also adds some meat or milk, meat dishes to their diet. So you can be very healthy as a vegetarian. Vegans, I think, have a more difficult time, and I would advise any vegan to make sure that they're taking an adequate multivitamin and mineral specific for a vegan. But make sure you're getting it, and most vegetarians would benefit from it as well.
A vegetarian who is also taking metformin because of diabetes and an acid-suppressing drug would be like a triple whammy when it came to vitamin B12, wouldn't it?
That would kind of be your worst case scenario. I will say that many vegetarians, that are healthy, that are using it for health purposes, many of them tend to be leaner and have better health habits. What I've seen recently, though, is many vegetarians, younger vegetarians, it's a moral choice not to consume animal products, and I certainly honor that. But they're eating chips and Pop-Tarts for breakfast. I mean, so they've eliminated animal products, but they have a terrible diet. And many of these individuals are going to be at high risk for nutrient depletion. So, being a vegetarian, you can certainly be a healthy vegetarian, but you have to be thoughtful about your diet.
Now, you mentioned a vegetarian vitamin formula, and that brings us to the entire concept of supplement labels and confusion. And you really go into this in great detail in your book, but I'd like to drill down into it because, there are now so many formulas. There's, the women's formula, there's the men's formula, there's the senior citizen formula, there's the cold formula. It goes on ad nauseum. Can you help us make sense of those confusing labels?
Well, I think the labels on dietary supplements are fairly outrageous. And I actually find a lot of the supplements in the marketplace are kind of outrageous as well. They have 100 milligrams of this superfood blend, right? 100 milligrams of broccoli, tomatoes, cauliflower, 100 milligrams of those food powders. I mean, that's nothing. I mean, it's nothing. It's just fluff. It's marketing, and you're paying a premium price. Women, they often will say women under 50, women over 50. And so the women over 50 supplements don't contain iron. We don't want a woman taking supplemental iron if she's no longer menstruating. So companies think a woman over 50 will not be menstruating, so they don't include iron. Well, you could be 52 years old and having heavy periods as you're in this menopausal transition and need iron. And you could have been a 38-year-old woman who had her uterus removed, had a hysterectomy, and you should not be taking iron. So it's difficult, I think, for the consumer to sort of go through. You have to read the labels more carefully. You have to become a very savvy consumer, and you have to, write down what's on your label, and then you have to really go through. That's partly what we do in the book, is help you go through. Are you getting too much of this or too much of that? Now, I will tell you from the CDC biomonitoring data that men are at risk for iron excess. So iron deficiency was way too common in children and women of reproductive age. Disturbingly, the level of iron deficiency, 16% of black women between the ages of 12 and 49, the reproductive aged black women, 16% with frank iron deficiency, low iron. So it is important to make sure that the right people are getting iron. But men should never take supplemental iron unless they're specifically advised to. That study through the CDC showed that men were at risk for excess, and excess iron is dangerous. It's dangerous for the liver in particular. It can cause cirrhosis and severe liver damage. So these are the things you have to think about. You can't just think about a senior vitamin or a young men's vitamin. You have to really be looking carefully at what the ingredients are and making sure that you're getting what's needed for you.
Dr. Low Dog, you've also mentioned a couple of times that Black women in particular may have some nutritional deficiencies that are more common, perhaps, than other members of the population. How does that affect health outcomes?
Well, this has been an area of interest for me for a long time, looking at sort of the disparities that we see in health in the United States. And, as somebody who used to do a lot of baby catching in my former life as a midwife, it always disturbed me that, in this country, even with all the advances that we have made, that a college-educated black woman, her baby is twice as likely to die before 1 year of age than a white woman who's a high school dropout. So this is not just about education. This is a lot around stress. It's a lot around many things. But one thing I've always wondered was, are there significant nutrient deficiencies or nutrient deficits that may be contributing to some of this? Now, we do know that African Americans in general are women more likely to be deficient in iron, B1, B6, and vitamin D. Now, these are all very important. Iron is very important during pregnancy and also in early childhood. Vitamin D may also be playing a role in preeclampsia and a condition in late pregnancy where blood pressure begins to go up, and it can be quite dangerous, and black women are at higher risk for this. So when I look at these things, thiamine deficiency also may be higher. I look at this and go, how does this play into stress and ability to cope with stress? How does this play into cancer and cancer risk? We're looking now at vitamin D and cancer risks. Black men often are low in vitamin D and there may be an association with prostate cancer, especially aggressive prostate cancer. So is there a correlation here? And we don't know all the answers to this. The questions are being raised, but if we believe everybody's getting everything they need in their diet and that we just keep telling everybody, just eat a good diet, we're not going to do the research that is necessary to really begin to see, can we target more specifically certain populations, women, age, gender, medication use, and can we be more sophisticated in who we're doing lab testing on and who we're making recommendations for when it comes to key nutrients. Hispanics, we know, are more likely to be deficient in niacin, magnesium, and folate. Even though we've done a great job with folic acid in this country, Mexican-American women still have higher rates of babies born with neural tube defects than other races. And this could be in one way because, interestingly enough, many women, Mexican-American women living in this country may be shopping and buying their corn and cornmeal products in the part of the grocery stores that are from that comes from Mexico. And it's not fortified with folate. And so they may not be getting all the folate supplementation that they need because they're not using fortified corn and cornmeal in their products. So this may be one thing we're looking at. In the state of New Mexico, I met with my senator. I met with one of the senators from New Mexico because I was so concerned about the fact that Mexican-American children between the age of 1 and 5 have double the rate of iron deficiency of white children. And iron deficiency between the ages of 1 and 5 put children at great risk for learning, slower learning, lower IQs, and poor performance in school. In a state like I am in New Mexico, where we have so many Mexican-American children, Hispanic kids, this is really concerning, and it makes one wonder about the poor school performance and that we see in this state. I am not trying to oversimplify that everything can be reduced to nutrients, but it is an important part of the conversation. If these children, we don't test kids, we're not testing 3-year-olds for their iron. We do a test at 1, and we typically aren't testing unless we suspect anemia. But if you don't know that Mexican-American children are at higher risk, who's going to do the test? We don't like sticking 3-year-old children and doing blood draws for no reason. This is complex. That's why people want to make this very, very simple, this conversation very simple, and it's not.
You're listening to Dr. Tieraona Low Dog, Fellowship Director for the first Interprofessional Fellowship in Integrative Health and Medicine. She was previously Fellowship Director at the Center for Integrative Medicine at the University of Arizona. Her new book is Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More. In it, you'll learn how you can create your own customized vitamin formula.
After the break, we'll explore the unintended consequences of the dietary advice to eat less salt.
We'll also consider some drug-nutrient interactions and drugs that may lead to nutritional deficits.
Should you consider taking supplements beyond vitamins and minerals? What about probiotics?
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore. Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Foot Cream with Shea Butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7339. The website, uddercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1022. That number again, 800-732-2334. Online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Today, we're exploring the topic of dietary supplements. Doctors and patients don't always agree about whether a supplement might be prudent. Where's the science on this subject?
Our guest, Dr. Tieraona Low Dog, is one of the country's leading experts on the science of dietary supplements and botanicals. She's been chosen to chair many panels for the U.S. Pharmacopoeia in that area. Her new book is Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More from National Geographic.
Dr. Low Dog, we've talked about the across-the-board nutritional recommendations that really don't serve everyone well because we're not all exactly the same. But one of the kind of across-the-board recommendations, in addition to eat less fat, is eat less salt. Or, in fact, if possible, don't eat any salt. How well does that message serve us?
The message about salt has been an important one. We don't want people consuming excessive amounts of salt. However, the vast majority of people are getting their sodium not from their home salt shaker, but from processed foods. Processed foods, the salt that is used in these foods is not iodized. So there's no iodine. The reason we started putting iodine in salt back in 1924 was because it is the easiest way to get iodine into the population. Salt is inexpensive, it's used by everybody, and it's relatively stable and doesn't change the flavor of the salt. These no-salt messages have meant people are – the one place they've cut back on salt is at home with their home salt shaker. So they're not adding salt at home. They may be still getting sodium, but not at home, which is the only place they're probably going to get iodine. And what has happened particular is that young reproductive-aged women now, as a whole, are borderline insufficient for iodine based on urinary tests, looking at urine levels of iodine. Black women may be more vulnerable because we have been specifically aggressive in the African American community talking about salt and blood pressure. So we've seen in a number of studies where black women in particular, including the data from the CDC, are more at risk for having low levels of iodine. Even mild iodine insufficiency or deficiency during pregnancy has been associated with a higher incidence of ADHD in children and lower IQs. A meta-analysis of 18 studies actually found that iodine deficiency lowered your IQ scores by an average of 13 points. This is really stunning. The American Thyroid Association recommends that all pregnant women take a prenatal vitamin that contains 150 micrograms of iodine every single day, but more than half of all the prenatal vitamins in the American marketplace contain no iodine. None. So, where are you supposed to get it? And let me tell you, everybody's also now fallen in love with this Himalayan salt and kosher salt and all kinds of salts, pretty salts. Unless it says that it contains iodine, you're not going to get it. So you either need to take a supplement that's got it, you need to buy iodized salt. And another thing is just a lot of people like to buy the big jugs. The big jugs of salt, big containers. You don't want to do that, actually. You want to buy them in small containers of iodized salt. 1 teaspoon contains roughly 400 micrograms of potassium iodine. You lose almost half of that by 2 months after opening the package. So it reduces by almost half. So you don't want these big jugs. You want to buy smaller and make sure it says that it's iodized. And if you're pregnant, look for a prenatal vitamin that contains 150 micrograms of iodine. Take it every day.
You're listening to Dr. Tieraona Low Dog. Her new book, Fortify Your Life, Your Guide to Vitamins, Minerals, and More. And in a moment, we're going to talk about the and more part. But first, I want to go back to this concept of making sense of those confusing labels. I mean, first of all, a lot of supplements especially the dietary supplements, not talking about necessarily vitamins and minerals now, say something like serving size. It's like, wait a minute. I don't think of this stuff as like a serving. I think of it as like a dose. And then when you look at doses like B12, you'll see labels that have 25 micrograms all the way up to 1,000 micrograms. And if you're looking at minerals like magnesium, you'll find magnesium citrate, magnesium lactate, magnesium glycinate, and you kind of go, well, which one should I pick? It's so confusing. Dr. Low Dog, give us some insight.
Well, it is. And because these are regulated more like foods, we talk about serving sizes and not, like a dose. So that's always been kind of, that's an interesting thing. And what is on the label is actually a daily value. It's not the recommended daily allowance, right? So the daily value is one number, and it basically is the same amount whether you're a 6-year-old kid or an 80-year-old man. So that's something else people don't realize is that the daily value is just one number. It's not specific for male or female, young or old. It's just one number. So if you see 100% of if you look at the label and it says, a certain amount, and then it says 100%, what that means, it's 100% of the daily value, but that may be more than what you need if you're a kid. It may not be enough if you're somebody who's older. So you have to really pay attention to that. It's not very helpful, but those are the daily values. I go over in the book extensively about the different types of magnesiums, for instance, magnesium citrate versus oxide versus glycinate. These salts, if you will, that minerals are attached to can impact their bioavailability and also their adverse effect or side effect profile. So magnesium oxide, for instance, tends to be more diarrhea producing than magnesium glycinate. So it is important to look at these things. A vitamin's not simply a vitamin. A mineral's not simply a mineral. If you're taking, because we were talking about proton pump inhibitors, if you're taking, Nexium and you don't get much calcium in your diet and you need to take calcium, you would not take calcium carbonate. That's not going to do you any good. You'd have to take a calcium citrate, for example. So that's what I said. It's like it's a confusing marketplace out there, and the labels aren't very helpful, and companies are always trying to get themselves a competitive edge, right? So I get a competitive edge by making my supplement label look a little different than somebody else's. And so you really want to do your homework. You want to know, based on my age, my gender, my diet, my disease, things that I may have going on, my lifestyle. I need to be very specific at what I'm looking for and how much I want in my supplement. And certainly if you're an older person, 25, 50 micrograms of B12 is really appropriate, and higher amounts if you're a vegetarian. But you probably don't need that amount if you're younger and you have a mixed diet that also includes animal products.
One of the things that you have in your book is a list of drug-nutrient interactions that we found extremely helpful. And I think a lot of people don't stop to think about it. We've talked a little bit about metformin. We've talked a little bit about proton pump inhibitors. But over 30 million Americans are taking something called ACE inhibitors. These are drugs like lisinopril, for example, or ramipril. And I was actually surprised that they might deplete the body of something important like zinc, including the diuretics that, a gazillion people are taking, like hydrochlorothiazide, that something like zinc that we don't even think about very much could be depleted. And I'm also wondering about other nutrients like coenzyme Q10 and statins. You mentioned CoQ10 and a number of drugs that might deplete it.
Yes. And, the zinc is fairly fascinating. I mean, some of these medications, these ACE inhibitors, they increase your urinary excretion of zinc, right? So it's like you're just peeing out more of it. And it's interesting that a number of dental colleagues have told me that when they heard about that, they were like, oh, my gosh, I have patients that come in that talk about taste disturbances within 3-4 months of starting these medications. And that's probably zinc. But zinc is not, we do not have a good laboratory test for zinc. So it is one that kind of has to be made by clinical judgment. So people who take ACE inhibitors in particular should probably make sure they're getting a multivitamin that includes zinc. CoQ10 is an interesting one because everybody thinks of statins, and they think statin medications that lower cholesterol. We know that those can lower coenzyme Q10 levels. But I find it interesting that we often do not talk about, enalapril can be associated with lower CoQ10. Clonidine can also cause this. So there's a number of medications that are associated with lowering CoQ10, even warfarin, the medication that people take for preventing blood clots. Many of these can actually deplete the body of CoQ10 and may make people feel more fatigued. But then you have the double whammy. Large doses of CoQ10 may interfere with warfarin, right? So again, that chapter of the book, I spent, several months working on that because there was no easy place to just find all the information. I had to go hunting all over the place to really find it. And there's some that say, this could be depleted, but then when you go, it's very theoretical. There's no real data on it. So I created this as a way for people to not only to know what nutrients may be depleted, but maybe if they shouldn't take certain nutrients within a few hours of taking medications, or if they shouldn't take a particular nutrient at all because of the medication they're on. I hope people will find that useful.
I have no doubt they're going to. You also have another chapter in the book that is about nutraceuticals. So beyond vitamins and minerals, what other sorts of things are worth consideration?
Well, and again, this one, I know people are going to say you didn't include this or you didn't include that, but I did try to include some of the more popular or what I consider more important non-vitamin, non-mineral, non-herbal supplements. And so this included things like probiotics, which I think we're in our infancy really understanding probiotics. But mark my word, in another 5 to 10 years, we're going to know a whole lot more about who, what species, how much, and when people should be supplementing with these probiotics to really improve their health. Omega-3 fatty acids. Every other day there's a different message on, should people, take fish oil? Well, if you never eat fish and you're not getting omega-3s from walnuts and other things in your diet, they're essential fatty acids. You need them. Your body requires them. So, and this is especially important in people as they age and in pregnant women. So I talk about omega-3s, probiotics. I talked about glucosamine and chondroitin, updating people on some of the most current research that does indeed show that the combination, not either one alone, but the combination does seem to really help relieve people's symptoms of arthritis, similar to more potent medications, especially when taken over time. And there are 2 studies using MRIs that do appear to show that it may slow the loss of cartilage in the knee. So part of these were for people to be able to sort of know, in this whole world of supplements out there, are there a few that may be very important for me? Because I work with a lot of diabetics, I also felt like it was important just to talk about things like alpha lipoic acid, which, for people who have diabetes who may start to have some, numbness and tingling in their feet, neuropathy, they may want to consider alpha lipoic acid for its beneficial effects. And last, before I go, I have to say that choline is vitally important for making sure that fat doesn't accumulate in our liver. It's technically kind of like almost a member of the B vitamin family. And it's what's in eggs. You get it in the egg yolk. But choline is really important for making sure fat doesn't store in the liver. It's really important for making the brain's, messaging chemicals and acetylcholine, which plays a role in memory and thought and muscle control. And it's vitally important during pregnancy. We believe and this is a hypothesis, but early data is suggesting this, so we got to stay tuned for more evidence. But we believe that choline may offer the child in utero, if mom gets adequate amounts of choline, it may offer that child lifelong protection against anxiety and exaggerated response to stress. Now, given the state of our world today, I'd say even a small degree of protection may be invaluable. And the messages that we continue to tell people to quit eating eggs was a bad message, especially since it is probably, outside of like beef liver and a few other things, the most concentrated way to get choline in the diet, and virtually no prenatal vitamins contain it. Recommended daily allowance, 450 milligrams every single day for a pregnant woman, 550 milligrams a day if you're breastfeeding. Nobody's talking about it, and it's in virtually no supplement.
Dr. Low Dog, there are a couple of meanings we could take away from your title, and I'm just wondering what you were thinking when you came up with Fortify Your Life.
That I believe that we have, throughout history, used foods or natural substances to increase our strength and our resilience. I believe today that there are key vitamins, minerals, and other nutraceuticals like probiotics and omega-3s that can actually be used to strengthen our bodies, enhance our resilience to stress and disease, and improve our health long term. And that was the whole motivation for writing the book.
Dr. Tieraona Low Dog, thank you so much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Dr. Tieraona Low Dog. She's Fellowship Director of the First Interprofessional Fellowship in Integrative Health and Medicine. She's an internationally recognized expert in the fields of integrative medicine, dietary supplements, herbal medicine, and women's health. Her brand new book is Fortify Your Life, your guide to vitamins, minerals, and more from National Geographic.
If you're taking any medications, you need to find out how they could affect your nutritional status. Dr. Low Dog has provided an essential guide to this critical topic with specific recommendations.
Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Russ Henry and Al Wodarski are the engineers. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number is 800-345-7339. The website, uttercream.com.
To order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is 1022. That number again, 800-732-2334. At the web, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit the site, you can check out information on prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. Share your thoughts on today's show, and don't miss our Listen and Read offer that includes Dr. Low Dog's book and a CD of this interview.
At our website, you can also sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You'll never miss another People's Pharmacy program again. You can also share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com. In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you so much for listening, and please join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.